Welcome to episode 25 of the G2 on 5G. It's everything related to 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is Anshel and Will. So let's get started with my first topic. Nokia predicts an $8 trillion effect on global GDP by 2030 as a result of 5G private networking. They commissioned a study, and so that was released this week. I actually commented and provided some insight on Twitter. That's a pretty aggressive number, but when you look at what they're talking about, they're looking at how 5G and that modality is going to transform different industrial sectors. And we've talked about Industry 4.0 on our podcast in the past, and I would say it's an aggressive number, but I'd say at the same time it's theoretically realistic as well. What are your thoughts, Anshel?
So I think 2030 is too soon.
Yeah.
I think that's really my issue with the number. I think Qualcomm had a study that came out a year or two ago that said like 40 something trillion dollars will be generated by 5G as a whole.
Yeah.
Including private 5G. I forget what date, but I don't think it was 2030. I think it was much less aggressive.
Yeah.
I would say 2035 maybe makes more sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's totally reasonable because I think if you really understand the potential of 5G, then you know that there's a lot more potential on the infrastructure industrial side than there is in the consumer, just because it's so untapped.
Right.
And there's a massive delta in terms of connectivity that's needed and what's available in terms of price, cost, speed, availability. All of those things can be solved with 5G private networking when implemented properly. And I think the 8 trillion number is very reasonable.
Yeah,
I just don't know about 10 years exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting, it's no secret that Nokia is leading the charge, amongst its big infrastructure peers with respect to private networking through their Nokia Enterprise division. So this is probably an attempt to put some further sales, wind in their sails, actually.
Yeah.
And drive that forward. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But let's get into iPhone. Big announcement this week, right? And there was a lot of marketing hype from the operators leading up to it, especially in the US. So I think you wanted to share some insight there.
Yeah, so I have a prop. I've got the Betty Crocker prop. So it's I have very strong lighting, so you might not be able to see it very clearly. But this is a cake mix that T-Mobile sent a bunch of press and analysts leading up to the iPhone event, which is on Tuesday. I got this on Monday. Mm-hmm. Some press got theirs on Friday and Saturday. But this is a 5G layer cake that kind of shows a visual illustration of what they can do with their 5G spectrum across 3 different bands. But they weren't alone in their marketing. There was some pretty heavy marketing from Verizon. They were actually on stage at the iPhone event. And that's when they decided to launch their nationwide 5G network, which uses dynamic spectrum sharing with 4G to give 5G coverage, but doesn't really improve speed significantly. Yeah. And I think that's also why Apple, which I'll talk about in my next topic, also had some interesting features in the new iPhone that switch between 4G and 5G and a bunch of other things that were interesting. But the key was Verizon's CEO was on stage and made the announcement of the new network. And I think someone did a supercut on Twitter of all the times 5G was mentioned during the Apple event, and it was 72 times.
Nice. Well, Apple is finally at has a seat at the 5G table, right? So they're about a year behind, the others in the market, but kind of given where deployments are, I think Apple, right, was pretty adamant about this. They didn't think that was going to be a huge issue.
We'll talk about it a little bit later, but I'll get into more detail about the new iPhone's capabilities. But the marketing was very aggressive, and there's a reason for that. But I was kind of curious what your take was on the marketing, at least from the carriers. There's some promotions that we'll also talk about in my next topic. But in terms of marketing leading up to the event, what were you thinking?
It didn't surprise me. We knew there'd be a lot of fanfare around it. I think, you're the device guy. So, when you get into your second topic, you'll talk about the form factors like the Mini as an example. But I thought the marketing was brilliant. I think T-Mobile did a brilliant job. I'm on a keto diet right now, so I've got to wait to bake my cake.
I know, I'm not baking mine. My rule that people were asking me, like, are you gonna bake it? I was like, I'll bake it once T-Mobile has all 3 layers of the cake in San Diego.
I love it. I love it. That's cool, man. Well, I'll save mine once I drop a few more pounds. So let's shift to my second topic this week. And AT&T announced that their FirstNet, first responder network, is extending to the U.S. Army, 70-something locations. I'm assuming it's obviously in the U.S. And what's interesting about FirstNet, I've been following this. If you kind of look back at how Motorola sort of ruled the roost, back in the early days, having almost sort of a proprietary technology, right, that used obviously spectrum in police cars. And now FirstNet, the reason why it's been deployed is that with that sort of siloed sort of approach in sort of the Motorola ecosystem, it was difficult to connect those first responders in real time to hospitals and care facilities and that sort of thing. So FirstNet's really extended that that capability and that communication capability, connecting all the dots there. But I think it's interesting the U.S. Army is adopting this, and I think there could be sort of real advantages for on a number of fronts. I'm curious to get your intake on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because FirstNet wasn't really originally designed for the military, right? It was for first responders, but it's still a very reliable, dependent, network. I think it's very reasonable for the military to use FirstNet. Mm-hmm. I think my concern is whether or not the military may, because of the size of the military, could impede first responders' ability to use that network effectively. And have uncrowded, unencumbered spectrum. Yeah. So I think it'll be important to make sure that that doesn't happen, because it is only it's a limited amount of spectrum that AT&T has there, and I'm really curious to see how moving that over to 5G and leveraging that for 5G is going to potentially make it more flexible and have a better quality service.
I think it would, because obviously, 5G can support more devices. It's low. Has power management capabilities that exceed that of LTE. And when I think about it, think about, once they can deploy 5G, within FirstNet, then you can start doing things like real-time, video, high-resolution video from an ambulance, as an example, back to a hospital, so that you can be doing a better job of preparing triage and that sort of thing. So, and I think the applications could be interesting for the military as well. But to your point, yeah, I'm a little concerned, is that going to crowd out the first responders? But, I guess time will tell, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to your second topic. It's the 5G iPhone.
Yeah, so iPhone event happened this week. Today is actually pre-orders, but people are pre-ordering their phones today. And basically, you got 4 new iPhones. You have the Mini, then you have the 12. So they're all iPhone 12s. You have the iPhone 12 Mini, which is actually the smallest, most compact 5G phone that's available today. Mm-hmm. It does not lose any of the features of the standard iPhone 12. Has the same camera, processor, connectivity, everything, in a smaller body. So that's going to be very popular. Then the iPhone 12, then there's the iPhone 12 Pro and the iPhone 12 Pro Max. And all 4 models support 5G. And in the US, all 4 models have millimeter wave, which is quite the achievement, because a small body phone is very difficult to do both low band and millimeter wave. There's just, the real estate isn't there. So Apple probably did some magic there on the Mini. Only the US model will be millimeter wave. All other models will be just sub 6. Yeah. Canada and Japan get their own model, and the rest of the world gets their own model as well. So there's 3 different SKUs, and within every SKU, there's 4 phones. So there's a total of 12 SKUs overall of the iPhone, but all of them support 5G. And the reality is there's going to be support for mid-band as well in the US. So this is going to be a future-proof kind of device where if you're on Verizon or AT&T, and as they start rolling out the spectrum, you just will need kind of like a radio update, like a software update to your phone.
Yeah.
So that's a really great thing for users. And at the same time, I mentioned earlier, they talked about 5G 72 times during the press conference. So 5G was obviously the #1 feature for the iPhone 12. Right. And I think it's a long time coming. Some other competitors are already on their second and third generation of 5G phones.
Sure.
So Apple is behind, but in typical Apple fashion, they came out swinging, and they didn't really substantiate a lot of their performance claims.
Mm-hmm.
But they did talk about peak gigabits per second. I think they said 3.5 is where they're at right now, but they might even be getting 4 on Verizon. So it'll be interesting to see what real world performance numbers are like, both on millimeter wave and sub-6 compared to Android phones. I think that's a long time comparison that people have been waiting to do, and I fully intend on being one of those people who do it.
Yeah. The Mini is interesting, and I'd love to get your take on this. My initial thought is like, hey, that form factor might be really ideal, for activities like, sports and boating and skiing and that sort of thing. I mean, where do you think the desire is coming from, for a smaller form factor? Palm introduced this mini, tiny little phone, unlocked, sold directly through their
Right.
website. But I'd love to get your take on, where you think the applicability is for a smaller format phone.
So I think the smaller phone, first of all, women have smaller hands. So they like smaller phones, and lots of phones have gotten really big, and lots of people are now using their pinkies to hold up the size of their phone, and they have indentations in their pinkies because they're doing it. So I think having a phone that fits in your hand comfortably is an ephemeral desire.
Yeah.
But I think having a smaller phone, I love having a big screen, but I hate having to hold a big screen.
Mm-hmm.
So I like having a foldable, like the Galaxy Fold, where it's skinny and then it unfolds into something bigger. But obviously iPhone doesn't have a foldable. So the best thing you can do is make it a compact device with a very big screen. So I think there's a lot of people who want something like an iPhone SE size without having the giant bezels.
Right.
Want to have a compact phone that's no compromises in the performance and features. And I think that's what the Mini is. It's really a no compromises device that really fits everyone's hand.
Yeah. No, I like the form factor. I mean, I think personally, if I'm going to the beach or if I'm skiing or doing whatever, it's just more pocketable. But I've been a fan of the Samsung, Note products as well as the iPhone Max. So it'll be interesting to see customer acceptance. And by the way, you get the award for the $10 word a day ephemeral. That was beautiful, beautifully done, Anshel. Let me move to my third topic this week, and Qualcomm. So Qualcomm will be doing their 5G summit. You and I have attended many years in Spain, and they'll be doing it virtual this year. And I'm looking forward next week. We've been pre-briefed on some things, and I think you're going to see, from an infrastructure perspective, some pretty interesting things from Qualcomm. We were both on that call earlier. Any thoughts there after we finished that call?
I think it's going to be very interesting.
We have to be careful because it's under embargo until the 20th. So
yeah, I mean, the thing is, Qualcomm's 5G Summit is always where the company tends to make pretty big announcements around technology that enables the growth of 5G. Mm-hmm. And they've done a lot of modem announcements in the past there.
Yeah.
And they've also done some infrastructure announcements. So I would expect probably a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. They're the leader in 5G when it comes to technology. Apple is using their 5G modem in their phones today. Mm-hmm. And so are most Android manufacturers. And there's a possibility even Huawei may, if Huawei goes with Qualcomm chipsets, if they're allowed to. So they're kind of the leader in the technology space. So I think that whatever they are going to announce next week will be really important for the industry in terms of long-term growth and sustainability.
Yeah, I agree. They are really driving the 5G ecosystem. So I'm looking forward, to Cristiano's keynote and, learning more. There'll be several tracks here that, Anshel and I will have access to, and you may see some Forbes write-ups in the near future, so stay tuned there. So let's move to your last topic this week, and it's, I've been following this week as well. It's all about 6G and a new alliance, right?
Yeah, so there's a new alliance called the Next G Alliance, which seeks 6G leadership, which is kind of a organization that the Alliance for Telecommunications and Industry Solutions, ATIS, has launched. And they are working with, wait for it, AT&T, Bell Canada, Ericsson, Facebook, InterDigital, JMA Wireless, Microsoft, Nokia, Qualcomm, Samsung, TELUS, Tellinks, T-Mobile, US Cellular, and Verizon. So pretty much most of the big North American carriers and infrastructure providers. They said there were more names coming, but basically it's kind of like an acknowledgement that there needs to be a path from 5G to 6G, and collaboration and cooperation as to what the carriers and the technology providers need to do to make that transition smooth, and I think also to be able to leverage the right infrastructure in time for what's needed for the industry, because it's gonna be a decade thing, right? We're not gonna see 6G for quite some time,
right?
But I think it's important that we have standards bodies, but there's also pre-standards conversations that need to occur amongst the companies to agree to what they should bring into the standards.
Yeah, I agree. And academia is going to be involved as well. I think I've spoke to this on a prior podcast, and I also wrote a Forbes article. I visited my alma mater, the University of Texas at Austin, and they have an organization that's focused on advancing, sort of the next generation of cellular connectivity. Qualcomm is actually a sponsor on campus here in Austin, Texas. And so, yeah, I think, you'll see a lot of academia jumping in, as well. And it'll be exciting and interesting to see like what 6G has in store as far as infrastructure and how, it's going to continue to lower latency and improve throughput. So it'll be interesting. So, hey, another great podcast this week, Anshel. Why don't you take us home?
We hope that our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide us with insight on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech, and I'm at Anshel. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.